Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're continuing with the next part of this epic time chamber series. My name is Ash. Please, for me, drop a like, join the Patreon, and subscribe to the page. Also, leave your comments down below. With that, let's begin.
Cross my heart and hope to die. Welcome to my dark side.
The scene changed to planet Namek. The skies above. Planet Namek churned violently as a dense aura of raw, unfiltered power raged outward like an untamed storm. The entire planet trembled beneath its weight, as if the very world itself was acknowledging the ascension of its new force. Standing at the center of this eruption was Omega Piccolo, a warrior reborn. His muscles pulsed with newfound strength, veins running electric with divine energy, as crackling arcs of lightning surged across his emerald skin. This was no ordinary transformation, no mere fusion. This was something far greater. Piccolo had fused with not just one, but two of the eternal dragons. The sheer intensity of his power stretched beyond anything the universe had ever witnessed, balancing the fragile line between mortal and divine. He flexed his fingers, watching as streaks of lightning danced from his fingertips to his forearm, their energy burning the very air around him. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, allowing his body to adapt to this unimaginable surge of strength. So much power, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else, his voice deep and reverberating like a god's decree. Then, something unexpected happened. The entire Namekian race, those who had been watching from a distance, all fell to their knees. It was not out of fear nor desperation. It was something far greater, a solemn act of respect. Even Elder Guru, the oldest and most revered among them, struggled from his chair, placing both palms on the ground, bowing in reverence. His voice, weathered with age yet firm with wisdom, spoke the words that none had ever dared to utter before. All hail, King Piccolo. The words echoed across the vast plains, carried by the voices of hundreds of thousands of Namekians as they emerged from their homes, their sacred pods, their places of rest. All of them joined in unison, their voices rising into the heavens. All hail, King Piccolo! Piccolo's sharp eyes scanned his people, the weight of their expectations pressing against him like a mountain. For the first time, he truly felt what it meant to be more than just a warrior. He was a protector, a leader. He turned his gaze towards the dark presence looming in the distance. Azazel, the entity that had brought destruction and chaos upon this world. The one who had threatened the very existence of his people. His anger surged, his aura growing wilder, the storm around him intensifying. "You all must leave this place," Piccolo commanded, his voice cutting through the chants like a blade. "It's not safe here anymore. Things are about to get dangerous." The Namekians did not hesitate. Without question, they began their retreat, moving swiftly, disappearing into the far reaches of the planet, far beyond the coming battlefield. Azazel watched the display with amusement, his arms crossed, his dark aura pulsating with malevolence. A smirk crept across his face. "A king," Azazel chuckled. "It seems your little power-up has earned you a title. How lucky of you. It's just a shame you won't live long enough to enjoy it." Raising a hand, Azazel's eyes flashed with a sinister glow as he whispered his next move. "Dark soul magic! Come to me!" A shadowy force erupted from his palm, invisible to the naked eye, yet its effects were immediate. The very air around Piccolo seemed to shift unnaturally. His body trembled slightly, as if being pulled by an unseen force, compelled to move forward against his will. For a brief moment, Azazel grinned, believing his magic had taken hold. But then Piccolo stopped. His towering frame remained unmoved, his stance unshaken, his piercing yellow eyes locked onto Azazel's with a look of utter disdain. "That little trick won't work on me anymore," Piccolo said, his voice dripping with confidence. "Not as I am now." Azazel's smirk faltered. His fingers twitched in frustration. With a sharp motion, Azazel fired a devastating Hakai energy blast, the black-purple sphere rocketing towards Piccolo at blinding speed. The sheer pressure of it cracked the ground beneath it as it tore through the air. Piccolo didn't flinch. At the very moment of impact, he simply lifted a hand and backhanded the blast away. A deep, earth-shattering boom erupted as the deflected attack slammed into the surface of Namek, ripping out an entire chunk of the planet in a cataclysmic explosion. Azazel's eyes widened, his jaw clenching. "Impossible!" he growled. "That thing managed to get this strong?" Before he could process it further, Piccolo moved, a blur of emerald light, a streak faster than even the wind itself. Piccolo closed the distance in an instant, appearing directly in front of Azazel. His eyes burned with determination, his body radiating confidence. And then, with nothing but a single flick of his finger, he flicked Azazel on the forehead. The force behind it was monumental. Azazel's body was catapulted downward, the very air screaming as he was sent crashing towards the ground. The impact was so intense that the planet itself trembled, the force creating a massive crater upon collision. The dust settled, revealing the wreckage, the cracks stretching miles from the point of impact. Watching from a distance, Master Roshi could hardly believe what he had just witnessed. His eyes were wide, his voice trembling. "Is that really Piccolo?" he gasped. Roshi's fingers tightened around his staff. At this rate, he might be even stronger than Goku. Elder Guru stood at the edge of a towering cliff, watching the battlefield unfold beneath him. His wise, aged eyes reflected the storm of power raging in the distance. The entire planet trembled beneath the clash of these two behemoths. Omega Piccolo, the newly crowned Namekian king, and Azazel, the primordial demon god. With a deep breath, the elder spoke, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "Piccolo now wields the power of not one, but two eternal dragons," he murmured, barely able to believe his own words. "I never thought it possible. Even among our most gifted warriors, no Namekian has ever achieved such a feat. Many have tried to fuse with an eternal dragon before, yet all failed. But he did it. Twice." He placed a wrinkled hand beneath his chin, contemplating the magnitude of what had just occurred. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "I shudder to think, what would he become if he fused with all of the eternal dragons?" He shook his head. "Number, that is beyond reason. That simply isn't possible. It mustn't be." Meanwhile, deep within the crater of his own impact, Azazel lay motionless, his body partially buried beneath the fractured earth. His dark aura flickered erratically, his breath uneven. "This shouldn't be possible," he thought, his expression twisted in disbelief. He clenched his teeth, frustration boiling inside him. "How?" he growled under his breath. "How did he gain this much power in such a short time? Was he hiding it? No. If he had this strength before, I would have sensed it." Then realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. It all happened when I was in that accursed bottle. He was referring to the evil containment wave, the technique that had briefly sealed him inside an enchanted jar. He gritted his teeth, his mind racing. But that was only for a few seconds, mere moments at best. So how did he? His thoughts were cut short. A shadow loomed over him. Omega Piccolo descended from the sky like a divine executioner. His muscular frame radiated raw power, his expression locked in a deadly glare. His right fist clenched, veins bulging as sparks of golden lightning danced along his arm. He wound up his attack, his knuckles crackling with planet-crushing force. Azazel's eyes snapped open. Boom! The impact never came. A dark, formless mass erupted around Azazel's body, forming a protective barrier. A Hakai sphere. Piccolo's fist collided with the sphere, and instead of shattering it, the energy clung to him like a living entity. The Hakai energy latched onto his arm, its sheer force dragging him forward, attempting to consume him entirely. Piccolo's instincts flared, and with a powerful leap backward, he tore himself free. He landed a few feet away, his eyes narrowing as he examined his arm. There was no damage, but something about that energy felt wrong. Azazel chuckled, rising from the rubble. The Hakai sphere twisted and shifted, slithering up his body, wrapping itself around him like a living armor of destruction. His red eyes gleamed with malice. "Don't get cocky, mortal." His voice was laced with contempt as he hovered above the battlefield, his body fully encased in the dark energy. And then he vanished. Boom! A deafening explosion of force tore through the sky as Azazel reappeared right in front of Piccolo in less than a nanosecond. The sheer speed of his movement ruptured the atmosphere, sending out shockwaves that flattened the landscape for miles. The force was so intense that even the Namekians watching from afar were thrown off their feet. Entire trees ripped from their roots by the sheer power of his movement. Piccolo's eyes widened, Fast! Azazel's fist was already moving. A right hook, cloaked in pure Hakai energy, came screaming toward Piccolo's face. Boom! Piccolo barely had time to react. His forearm shot up, blocking the punch just in time, but the impact was beyond devastating. The collision sent a pulse of dark energy outward, splitting the very ground beneath them in two, the shockwave ripping through mountains, reducing them to rubble. The planet itself groaned under the strain. Piccolo gritted his teeth as his arm trembled. His strength, it's insane. He could feel it. Azazel wasn't just coating himself in Hakai energy. No, he had fused with it. Azazel grinned wickedly, his violet-black aura crackling with malevolence. What's wrong, King Piccolo? He sneered. You didn't think I'd let you have all the fun, did you? Piccolo's sharp mind quickly processed the situation. He's stronger when he channels this destructive aura. If I'm not careful, even a single mistake could erase me completely. He had no time to hesitate. With a sharp pivot, Piccolo twisted his body and launched a brutal counterattack, driving a powerful elbow strike towards Azazel's temple. Wham! Azazel barely had time to block. The force behind Piccolo's strike sent out a shockwave of golden energy, creating a violent clash of divine versus destruction. Sparks flew, the air itself burning from the friction between their auras. Azazel laughed, clearly enjoying the fight. His hand shot forward, gripping Piccolo's wrist. His voice dripped with amusement. Hakai force is more than just energy, he said, his grip tightening like a vice. It's my very essence. Boom! The battlefield was no longer just a battlefield. It was a dying world. The very fabric of planet Namek groaned beneath the overwhelming forces tearing through its core. Entire sections of rocky terrain shattered, breaking free from the surface and rising into the sky, caught in the gravitational pull of the two clashing titans. The oceans surged in defiance, their once calm waters now thrashing violently, forced to change course as the planet's equilibrium spiraled into chaos. Storm clouds gathered above, swirling like an omen, purple lightning crackling within their depths. This was no ordinary battle. This was a war between gods. Far away, Elder Guru sat heavy in his chair, his ancient eyes fixed on the growing devastation. The tremors in the earth, the distortion in the sky, it all filled him with an unease he hadn't felt in centuries. His voice was low, almost a whisper. This destructive force, I fear for Namek. His frail hands trembled slightly. Can Piccolo hold on? Beside him, Master Roshi stood with his arms crossed, his usually lighthearted demeanor absent. The old martial artist had seen countless battles in his lifetime, but nothing like this. The sheer pressure of the two warriors' power was suffocating, pressing against his chest like a boulder. He gritted his teeth. I've never felt anything like this. A strong gust of wind nearly knocked his hat from his head, and he had to hold it down to keep it from flying away. Even Goku's mightiest battles never shook the planet quite like this. His voice carried a mix of awe and fear, and the battle was only getting started. On the battlefield, Omega Piccolo saw an opening and took it. With explosive speed, he lunged forward, channeling every ounce of battle knowledge he had ever gathered into the perfect storm of close-quarters combat. His arms and legs moved in a blur, each strike a calculated, ruthless execution of skill and power. Rapid jabs, crushing elbow strikes, spinning low kicks, each movement left behind afterimages of green light, the sheer force of his blows distorting the very air around him. Azazel grunted, forced onto the defensive, his arms whipping back and forth, blocking, parrying, countering with a perfect mix of bestial aggression and cunning reflexes. Though magic was his specialty, his sheer physical power had now surpassed even some of the greatest warriors in the cosmos. His Hakai energy pulsed through his body, sharpening his reactions and feeding him limitless stamina. Azazel smirked as he barely dodged a downward knee smash, leaping back just in time to avoid getting his skull caved in. The impact of Piccolo's strike detonated the ground beneath, sending a massive shockwave outward, leaving behind a deep crater. Azazel flipped gracefully, landing atop a floating chunk of debris. Impressive, his smirk widened. But let's see how you handle this. Raising a single clawed hand, Azazel's palm crackled with swirling black energy. A deadly twisting mass of destruction materialized, warping the air around it.
Hakai Ripper!
He roared. With a single horizontal slash, the dark wave of pure annihilation ripped through space itself, cutting toward Piccolo's chest. The attack didn't just move, it bent reality around it, distorting time and matter in its wake. Piccolo's eyes narrowed. Too fast to block, too strong to tank. At the very last moment, he twisted his body, the crescent wave barely grazing his shoulder. The sheer heat of its energy seared through his uniform, leaving a burning mark on his skin. A faint sizzle filled the air. Piccolo exhaled sharply, his golden aura flickering around him.
That was close,
he muttered, his gaze darkened, his fists clenching. He won't get a second chance. Piccolo moved. This time, he weaved through the battlefield like a phantom, his body vanishing and reappearing in multiple directions. His movements became a fluid dance of power, each step kicking up the debris of a broken world. Azazel's Hakai Ripper continued to slash through the air, but Piccolo was already 2 steps ahead, dodging with ease, twisting his body between the deadly arcs of destruction. Then he struck. With a thunderous roar, Piccolo dashed in close, closing the gap in a fraction of a second. His knee drove forward, slamming straight into Azazel's midsection with tremendous force. Boom! Azazel's eyes widened in shock, a grunt escaping his lips as the attack knocked him back several yards, his boots scraping against the rocky terrain. Before he could recover, Piccolo extended his arm, his Namekian physiology allowing him to reach beyond normal limits. His elongated fingers wrapped around Azazel's wrist with iron grip strength. "Take this!" Piccolo bellowed. With a powerful twist of his hips, he swung Azazel overhead, flinging him through the air like a ragdoll before brutally slamming him into a jagged rock formation. Boom! The impact shattered the mountain-sized structure, sending an avalanche of boulders cascading down over the demon god. For a brief moment, everything was silent. Then, a deep rumble echoed through the battlefield. The cloud of dust that had risen from the wreckage lingered in the air, obscuring everything from view. Was it over? The warriors watching from afar held their breath. Piccolo hovered in the air, his chest rising and falling with each controlled breath. His body burned with exertion, yet his focus remained razor sharp. He knew better than to assume that was the end. Sure enough, boom! The entire pile of debris that had buried Azazel erupted outward, a shockwave of purple-black energy radiating from the impact. Jagged rock formations were obliterated, the very air crackling under the sheer force of the demonic aura. And there he stood, Azazel. His body was battered, bruised, but far from broken. A sinister grin stretched across his face, his crimson eyes gleaming with wicked amusement. The dark energy coiling around him moved like a living creature, licking at his wounds, sealing them shut, reinforcing his already monstrous aura. "You dare fling me like a ragdoll?" Azazel snarled, his deep voice reverberating through the battlefield. "You'll pay for that." His aura exploded outward, and the ground beneath him began to liquefy, the intense heat of his Hakai presence scorching the very fabric of the planet. Namek itself seemed to scream in agony as veins of black lightning shot through the trembling earth. From the distant cliffs, Elder Guru's aged voice carried across the howling wind. "Azazel, his connection to destruction seems limitless." His old eyes widened, reflecting the purple glow of the battlefield. "Piccolo, you must be careful." Standing nearby, Master Roshi clung to his staff, his expression grim. The sheer pressure of the 2 titans' power was suffocating, making it hard for even a seasoned martial artist like him to remain standing. This level of power," Roshi muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. He gritted his teeth, pressing a firm hand against his hat to keep it from flying away in the storm of energy. The sky above darkened, as if the universe itself recognized the threat unfolding on Namek. Piccolo's gaze never left Azazel. He could feel it. The primordial demon god's strength had no end, no exhaustion, no limit. If I can't match him in raw destruction, Piccolo thought, I'll have to outmaneuver him. He recalled his years of relentless training, his early brutal battles with Goku, his mental lessons from Gohan, the strategic cunning he'd developed fighting alongside and against the Saiyans. He needed a new plan. Azazel suddenly spread his arms wide, his voice echoing in an ancient, forgotten language. Dark runes ignited in a circle beneath his feet, glowing with malice, pulsing with primordial magic older than the universe itself. Obsidian Deicide. A howling vortex of black lightning coiled above Azazel's head, twisting into the form of a colossal spear of pure annihilation. The air around it collapsed inward, its presence alone distorting space itself. This was not an attack meant to injure. This was an execution. Piccolo's eyes narrowed in alarm. He had seen destruction on cosmic levels. But this attack could erase Namek in an instant. He clenched his fists, summoning the divine might of the eternal dragons that now surged within him. "I won't let that thing touch this planet," he growled, golden green energy crackling along his arms. He took a slow breath, focusing every ounce of Kai into a single point. Then, Dragon King's focus beam, a blinding column of green-gold energy, erupted from Piccolo's fingertips. A beam so concentrated that the very air trembled from its force. It met Azazel's spear head-on. Boom! The collision was nothing short of apocalyptic. The sheer impact of the two energies tore the sky apart, leaving a gaping void where clouds had once been. Thunder rumbled, but not from the heavens. It came from the planet itself, its tectonic plates shifting beneath the weight of their clash. Distant mountains crumbled to dust. Rivers were flung off course, reversing their flow from the violent shockwaves. Even far-off stars flickered, reacting to the sheer force being unleashed. Watching from afar, Master Roshi clung desperately to a jagged rock, his fingers digging into the surface as the hurricane-like winds nearly lifted him off his feet. "This can't go on much longer," he shouted over the roar of energy, "or there won't be anything left of Namek." Above them, Elder Guru pressed his hands together, closing his eyes. "Hold strong, Piccolo," he whispered, his voice laced with urgency. "Hold strong." Piccolo and Azazel remained locked in place, their bodies trembling from the effort of sustaining their attacks. Both warriors poured more and more power into the clash, refusing to give an inch. The Dragon King's focus beam twisted violently against the Obsidian Deicide, neither willing to yield. Sparks of purple and green energy exploded outward, each spark the size of a meteor, burning holes in the sky itself. The universe held its breath. Then, a deafening roar shattered the heavens. Boom! The energy detonated in a blinding flash of light, so powerful it could be seen from space. The shockwave engulfed both warriors, tearing across Namek in an unstoppable tidal wave of destruction. Piccolo crossed his arms, bracing against the impact, feeling the force slam into his body like a raging storm. Azazel, too, dug his heels in, his Hakai aura flickering, his expression twisting as he fought against the force. When the light finally faded, both fighters hovered in the air, breathing heavily. Neither had gained a definitive edge, but the devastation around them spoke volumes. Azazel spat onto the ground, the droplets sizzling against the ruined terrain. His crimson eyes flickered with a mix of amusement and irritation. "You're resilient, I'll give you that," he said, his voice dripping with malice. He rolled his shoulders, his aura swirling violently around him. "But let's be honest here," he exhaled slowly, his smirk returning, though this time it looked slightly more strained. "I am eternal." His aura surged, once again swallowing the battlefield in darkness. "You can't hope to stand against a primordial demon god for long." Piccolo steadied his breathing, his chest rising and falling as he struggled to keep his energy stable. He was exhausted, drained, but he couldn't afford to show it. The entire planet of Namek depended on him. His golden green aura crackled with the divine power of the eternal dragons. But even that power had limits. He could feel the weight of the battle pressing down on his body, every movement slower than before. Still, he refused to falter. He clenched his fists and lifted his head, staring down the primordial demon god with unwavering determination. "I may not be eternal, but I have something you don't," Piccolo declared, his voice steady, filled with the pride of his people. "The will of the Namekians and the power of the dragons at my side." Azazel, floating ominously above him, tilted his head and let out a dark, guttural chuckle. His glowing red eyes burned with amusement as his lips curled into a cruel grin. "Bravery in the face of annihilation. How very mortal of you." His chuckle grew into a deep, menacing laugh that echoed across the battlefield, sending eerie vibrations through the very air. "I must admit, you've done well." He gestured casually, as if mocking Piccolo's efforts. "Before now, you wouldn't have even been able to lay a finger on me." His eyes gleamed with amusement, But then they changed. A sudden shift. His irises darkened, turning into an abyss of pure black void, radiating the true essence of a demon. Azazel's grin widened as his body trembled, his Hakai aura twisting violently, surging outwards in a tidal wave of destruction. But Piccolo's sharp senses went into overdrive. Something was wrong. "No," he muttered under his breath, his eyes widening as he felt the sudden, violent shift in power. Azazel's body erupted with new energy, the sheer pressure alone crushing the land beneath him. His aura expanded at an alarming rate, shaking the entire planet to its core. Namek itself cried out as its very existence trembled beneath his presence. "I wasn't even using my full power," Azazel roared, his voice splitting the sky itself. A wave of pure destructive force spread across the battlefield, warping reality, twisting space as light itself bent around his form. His presence alone was now too much for the planet to bear. Piccolo's breath hitched. "You have got to be kidding me." Even after his ultimate fusion, even after acquiring the strength of 2 eternal dragons, his body was beginning to fail him. His stamina was dropping fast, his energy reserves running dangerously low. His fingers twitched, his muscles ached, and now Azazel was at a level so monstrous that even the gods would hesitate. Far in the distance, Master Roshi stood frozen, gripping his staff tightly. He had seen many battles, many wars, but nothing like this. A cold sweat dripped down his forehead. "Oh no," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the howling storm. Beside him, Android 18, bruised, battered, but standing, clenched her fists, her blue eyes burning with emotion. "What are you saying, old man?" she snapped at Roshi, her voice shaking with frustration and grief. "That this fight is over?" She couldn't accept it. Not after everything. She had already lost so much. Her brother, her husband, the 2 people she loved most in this world, gone. And now, if Piccolo fell, then it all would have been in vain. Azazel's body flickered, and then, boom! He launched forward, tearing through the air at impossible speed, his fist surging with Hakai energy, aiming to end Piccolo in a single, decisive strike. Piccolo's instincts screamed at him, and he charged in as well, his own fist winding back, crackling with the last remnants of his divine power. There would be no retreat, no second chances. One final blow. The 2 warriors rushed toward each other, their speeds beyond light itself, their movements tearing the heavens apart. The clouds split, their energy strikes crashing into the planet below like celestial bolts of lightning. The very atmosphere of Namek changed, the planet on the brink of complete destruction. This was it. Both warriors swung their fists forward, their attacks carrying the weight of all existence itself. A direct hit would mean total planetary devastation, but Piccolo had no choice. If he held back even slightly, he would be killed instantly. His mind raced. There has to be another way. There have to be more eternal dragons out there. Namekians had existed for millennia. Surely there had to be others. His fist was inches away from impact. Azazel's smirk widened. "It's over, Namekian." But then, something unexpected happened. A shockwave of golden energy erupted through the battlefield, completely halting both warriors mid-strike. The air distorted as a colossal new presence entered the battlefield. Piccolo's eyes widened in shock. Azazel's smirk faltered for the first time. Then, boom! A massive explosion of raw, untamed power shook the battlefield as a figure descended from the heavens. The ground split apart beneath his landing. The air vibrated from the sheer force of his aura. And then, through the smoke and golden flames, a deep, guttural voice rumbled across the battlefield. Super Saiyan 6 Broly had arrived. And that's it for today's episode, guys. If you watched to the end, then that could be an indication that you enjoy the series. So please leave a like on the video. Thank you and take care.